not steal. Don't covet. Honor your parents. These are the rules God gives. Now, can there be anything more liberating than the directness, the simplicity, the clarity of those rules? I mean, just honor your parents. It doesn't take a genius to figure out how to do that usually. And God didn't give like 150 little sub-paragraphs to that rule. He just said, obey and honor your parents. Let the peace of Christ dwell in your hearts. He doesn't spell out 1,000 things that you're supposed to do every morning to make sure that the peace of Christ is dwelling in your hearts. He just says, do it. Let the peace of Christ dwell in your hearts. That's a wonderful quality of God's law. It is clear, it is simple, and obeying these rules leads to freedom. It is a perfect law of liberty, James says. Now you compare that with human rules. I remember during the whole discussion in the UK about leaving Europe, one of my cousins posted something on Facebook about, there's so many words in the 2 great commandments of Jesus, and there's so many words in the 10 commandments, and there's so many words in the U.S. Constitution, and there's so many words in Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and then here's the number of words in the EU regulation about watermelons. And it's hilarious. It's like, there's like 50 words in all these other things, and then there's like 37,000 words that the EU government has about watermelons, right? That gets to the heart of the issue. We call it red tape, don't we? I think that would be a good description of verse 20, or a good translation. Why, as if you were still living under the world's influence, do you submit to all this red tape? I mean, man's rules are not like God's rules. They burden us. They fill our consciences with uncertainty and fear. They weigh us down with a sense of just crushing obligation. I didn't get to the 300th thing that I'm supposed to do this morning. I didn't finish my obedience to all of these rules that are supposed to lead me to a higher and better life. And Jesus makes the same comment. Let's go back to Mark 7. Well, he doesn't make it in Mark 7. I'll have to just quote from memory a different text. But remember what he said about the Pharisees and the scribes who spin a whole web of rules that lay burdens on people, and then they don't do a thing to lift those burdens? I mean, there's poor little widows. Imagine an illiterate, poor, godly widow coming to the temple with little bits of money, no education, no time to think about how to apply this and that regulation, no legal training. And that simple, godly widow is living a life burdened under the thousands of obligations that those evil, ugly, false teachers were spinning. That's the harm that man-made rules does in your life. And if you once allow man-made rules to rule your conscience, you will find there is no end to the guilt, no end to the sense of burdensome obligation. You will never have the freedom that comes of saying, God just requires me to love him and love my neighbor. What does the Lord require of you but to live, to love justice and walk humbly with your God? I mean, it's simple, it's clear, wonderful. And then there's another problem with man-made rules, and that is that they locate the authority in the wrong place. They get it all wrong. And this is what Jesus deals with in Mark 7. The elders, they come with this big question in verse 5. Why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat with, defiled hands? They didn't use the right soap before dinner. Why do they disregard the essence of true religion? And Jesus turns to them with anger. He says, well did Isaiah the prophet write about you, hypocrites. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. And verse 8 makes it clear. You leave the commandment of God and hold to the tradition of men. See, when people come with a whole list of rules, usually what they say they're doing is helping you obey God's law, right? I mean, think of it this way. There's a fence between my house and the neighbor's house. Sometimes if I'm kicking a ball in the backyard with the kids, I kick the ball over, right? So maybe it would be helpful to build another fence about 5 feet, right, so that I would have a little bit of buffer and I might not kick the ball over there so much and annoy my neighbor. That may or may not be a wise thing to do, I'm not saying, but that's not how God's laws work. Because which rule becomes the ultimate authority in your life when you do that? Is it God's law anymore? Or is it little extra supplementary rules? And that's what was going on with these Pharisees. They had no concern for God's requirement that they show mercy and love to hungry people who needed to eat, and they didn't have time to go find the right tap to wash on. They were so fixated and concerned on these man-made rules and regulations that had no basis in Scripture. They were just guidelines to keep people from ever being in a circumstance where they may accidentally disobey God. They didn't wash. They didn't use the right soap. They didn't go through the right procedure. Jesus says that's idolatry. That is putting instead of God something or someone else as the main and ultimate authority in your life. And there's two problems here. There's, first of all, a problem with the false teacher, or with the person in your life who's coming to you and saying, now here's a rule I think you should follow and you'll be holier as a result. I don't have anywhere in Scripture for this, but I think it's a really good idea and I'm requiring it of you. If I ever do that, Jesus' comment is directed against me. That I am wrong and sinful to do that to you people as my congregation, to ever give you a rule that Jesus does not give. So it's a warning to all of us who might commit the sin of binding people's consciences in this way. But it's also a warning, notice, to the people whose consciences might be bound. That's how Paul takes it. Why do you submit to these regulations? Why do you let yourself be enslaved by the red tape that other people in your church are spinning for you, requiring you to do this, making you feel like second-class Christians because you don't apply God's law exactly the same way that they do? I mean, they look at God's law and they think it means I have to do this, 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 and this, and this. On Mondays, on Tuesdays, on Wednesdays. And that's perfectly legitimate. We should plan. We should prepare to obey God's law in